yourselves on mute. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first episode for 2023 of Adoption Happy Hour, brought to you by NAAP. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, where it is our mission to unify the adoption community and elevate our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connections. I'm Marcie Keithley, board president, and your host for this evening, along with Jennifer Falsing and Beth Story, my executive committee, also helping out in the Zoom room. Again, this is our first episode for 2023. We're entering our fourth year of Happy Hour, and I cannot believe that. It's been 4 years since we've been here almost every Friday night, bringing you all types of individuals across the adoption community, authors, podcasters, therapists, you name it, from all walks of life. We've just really enjoyed this, and we're so glad that you're starting off with us again this evening. And we're going to be talking to Fred here in just a few minutes. So if you've never attended a happy hour, we're going to do a couple of housekeeping items, but please feel free to use the chat bar at this time and say hi to Fred and let him know where you're from while we do a little couple of announcements. We want to remind everyone this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. Portions of this event are recorded and may be shared on our private happy hour group on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. What we will do is the recording from this evening will be on the Adoption Happy Hour group Facebook page. So that's where you'll be able to find it. So if you don't follow us there, make sure that you do. Please stay on mute during the presentation. If you've got a question or comment, please raise your virtual hand. You're welcome to continue to post questions and comments in the chat room. If you are experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thought, please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988. Okay. What's next?
Show next.
We're waiting on graphics. We need some music while we're waiting, right? Thanks, Jen.
You don't want me to sing.
We don't want you to sing.
No, you don't want me to sing. Actually, I'm not bad, but.
Okay, we wanted to remind everyone that we do have an upcoming summit called Untangling Our Roots, where NAAP has joined the organization Right to Know. It is in Louisville, Kentucky, which is right in my backyard, just right across the river. The early bird price of $279 has been extended to February 14th, and then the price will go up. So please take the opportunity to visit us at untanglingourroots.org. You can see all the presenters that are coming. You can see the entertainment. We've got a couple of days jam-packed for you. So we would love to see all of you join us, these three communities. So we're really excited about the upcoming summit. Some of our programs, we want to remind everyone that Dr. Joyce will be back with us again on the 17th. That's correct. At 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Putting Yourself Together After Reunion. Joyce is entering, this is what, her third year with us, right? Of doing this program once a month. And she has you have to register on Eventbrite for all of these, but this is a free event. And we'd love to join us on the 17th. Okay, and then we also have Danielle Gaudet on Self-Love Essentials for the Adoption Constellation. This is one of our fairly new programs that started in the last couple of months. And she is monthly on the last Thursday of each month at 6 p.m. EST. And her event is also heavily attended, so join us there as well. And then monthly on the second Thursday of each month at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have First Families, Birth Parents Journeying Together with that's facilitated by Amber Jimerson. And we hope you'll sign up for this one as well. What we're trying to do this year, and I'm going to go ahead and just talk about that briefly too, is for 2023, of the programs that we do have, we're going to have something every week. Adoption Happy Hour, like I said, it has been almost every Friday of the year for the last 4 years, and we're looking at doing that the first and the third of the first Friday and the third Friday of each month. We will have a happy hour. We're not going to have it every week because we do have these other programs. So you want to mark your calendars for the first and the third. If you still want to come back to happy hour, we'd love to have you. But we want to offer you something every week. So we've decided to do our scheduling just a little bit different this year. And then once a quarter, we're going to have some type of a special event that will be announced. It could be a workshop. It could be a special guest. We'll be doing this. Maybe it's a documentary. We might watch a film together, but we'll keep you posted on that. So those are some of the upcoming changes. So we're not going to announce our next guest until the end, correct, Jennifer?
Right.
Is that all the announcements that we have at this time?
I will share one more about the summit.
Okay, Beth, go ahead.
You can purchase a gift certificate for someone to attend. We advertise this around the holidays, but it can be a birthday gift, a Valentine's Day gift, or just because you want to give someone the gift of going to this awesome event. So we will drop links to these various things in the chat, but we just wanted you to know this is another thing that we're offering.
Okay, great. Is that everything then, ladies? Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, well, this time it gives me great pleasure to go ahead and introduce Fred Nicora as our spotlight guest for this evening. Fred, it's so good to see you.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and tell my story and chat about late discovery adoption.
Yeah, we're really excited to have Fred. For those of you that don't know, Fred is an author of the book Forbidden Roots, Memoir of Late Discovery Adoption. So we're going to be digging into this a little bit. And for those of you that are with us tonight, we will be having a drawing at the end of the evening, and Fred will be awarding someone an autographed copy of this book. So, okay, so let's just start out, and we're anxious to know your story, Fred, and how this all came about. Why don't we just dig in and just talk about your LDA story. So let's tell us, where you were born, how that came about, how you grew up, and let's just start.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in the Milwaukee Metro, in the western suburb, Wauwatosa. Went to a fairly large high school, about 450 students, from a pretty large family, not my immediate family. I was raised as an only child. But if you look at my mother's side, my father's side, my mother had several brothers and sisters, as well as did my father. Probably a bit tighter to my mother's side of the family. I, growing up as an only child, didn't have siblings around me. I looked at my parents, and I'm going to start out by saying, the whole time I grew up, there was always something that I knew wasn't quite right. Something didn't fit, and kids are kids, and I was no different than any other kid. And I kept trying to place that on me. What was I doing wrong? What am I doing different? Why am I not like what I think I should be like? I could look around me. I could see that within my family, I'll even say the way I talk, intonations, my inflections. Quite honestly, my parents were both of Eastern European origin in their family. My dad was 100% Romanian. My mom was roughly 50% Polish, German, and a few other things in there. But they were short and dark people. Nothing wrong with short and dark people. But I was big, blonde with blue eyes, and my dad did have blue eyes. So as I went through high school, I was like, well, that kind of fits, I guess. But I could tell something was amiss, and that kind of plagued me through, I'd say, most of my life. My parents were good to me. I'm not saying that they weren't. They were very kind people to me. In retrospect, I wish they would have told me, but they didn't. That was their choice. If you go back to 1959, they bought into the belief structure that the baby comes as a blank slate, and probably they're from a background that they're best off not knowing about. So as a result of that, they just kind of move forward with that. A little more information about that. Both my parents had passed when I found out. So I really was never able to bring any reconciliation about it with them. However, after I found out, I drilled a lot of relatives. And my dad's sister did shed some light. She indicated that because my father's family divorced in the 1930s, he ended up in the county home, the orphanage, for a bit of time. And he was the one that drove the desire to keep my knowledge secret, that from me. Everybody else did know, the entire extended family and everybody else did know around me. After high school, and I'm going to be honest about it, I came out of high school with a 2.2 cumulative average. I was considered the upper 3/4 of my graduating class, not a very stellar performance. But my ACT scores reflected something very different. So because of the higher ACT scores, I was able to get into college. I went up to UW Stout in Menominee, Wisconsin, and something changed up there. I was in a different environment, and my first semester I had a 4.0, never really went down. Things just kind of radically shifted for me. I would say I still struggled with identity. I felt a deep sense of insecurity the vast majority of the time I grew up. I ended up marrying later, and probably because of that insecurity, maybe some other things that were involved there, contributed to that. From UW Stout, I moved around a bit. I got both an undergrad and a graduate degree from there. Started a job down in Rockford, Illinois at a hospital. I was a management engineer, which is an industrial engineer for a hospital. Met my then, what resulted in my wife. We dated for a long time. I'll say I struggled in relationships, and as I got to know the adoptee population, relationships can kind of be challenging, and I was no different, even though I wasn't aware I was adopted. And I think that's something I've come to terms with over time, is that, yeah, I'm a late discovery. Because at first when I found out, and I'll get to the magic discovery point, I thought I didn't really fit into the adopted population because I didn't grow up knowing I was adopted. As time has gone on, because it's been 20 years since I found out, I found out that actually I've got a lot of similarities to the adoptee population as a whole, and mine just has an unusual twist to it, which is the late discovery. It does bring some additional complicating factors, but we can talk a little bit more about those later. I moved around a lot. I would say my early adulthood was just a nonstop searching for what's wrong. Is it the environment? Is it career? If you look at my career paths, I started out as an industrial engineer. I went into business consulting. I decided that wasn't right, so I went back to school, got a master's in architecture, practiced architecture for a while. Nothing really felt right yet. So I ended up going back, getting an educational license, and then taught high school and middle school for actually about 20 years. And during the early stage of when I started teaching high school is when I found out. So it kind of gets kind of fascinating, I would say, from my perspective, that when you think about it, after I found out, suddenly some things started to stabilize in my life. I think some of the pieces started to come together and some things started to make sense. So fast forward, all of a sudden we're at the year 2000. My family and I moved back down to southeastern Wisconsin. We were living in the Minneapolis-St. Paul Twin Cities area for about 10 years. That's where all three of my children were born. I had a driving need to get back down to kind of where I was from. And quite honestly, a big part of it was I really wanted my kids to experience extended family. I grew up in a large extended family, and up in the Twin Cities, we were kind of isolated up there. My sorry to say it, now ex-wife is from Pennsylvania. We didn't have any family up there. Holidays were always a travel trip, or trying to find the latest, who's going to host of our friends that are alone for the holidays, the holiday gathering. Both my parents had passed by the time I moved back here. When I got back, it all of a sudden became very strange for me, because a lot of the extended family, I moved down to the area thinking like, oh, this is going to be awesome. We can re-engage, and like my kids can be around my cousins' kids and everything. And I found I just wasn't included. It was almost like I was distanced from everything, and I didn't understand it. I'll say some lights went on later down the road with that. In October of 2000, I had two twin uncles. Now I'm also going to say my mother was from a family, a very tight knit Polish family who was very proud in their heritage. They took genealogy very seriously, and that was often a very contentious argument and thing that within family gatherings, that was I'm going to say a passionate drive that they had, which was kind of interesting growing up in that environment. So as I'm growing up, I could see that, that aspect of their lives was very important to them. And again, I kind of felt a little misaligned with that. Now, my mother had two brothers that were actually twins. Those twins, Bob and Rich, had a 60th birthday party at a large restaurant on the southwest corner of the Milwaukee Metro. It was called the Embers Restaurant. There were about 300 people there. And we got there. I arrived with my family. I had 3 children at the time. They were fairly young. I think my one daughter was 6, the other 5, and my son probably 2 at the time, 2 or 3. And I went off to the bar, get us to get some drinks for everybody. Came back to the table, and when I arrived back at the table, my wife looked at me and she pointed to one of my great aunts, an elderly woman, well into her 80s, and asked me. She said, is that Lydia? And I said, no, that's. Or no, she asked me, is that Alice? And I said, no, that's actually Lydia. And I knew what she meant by it, because Alice was known to get things confused. She just struggled with facts, and things weren't quite all intact all the time. On the other hand, Lydia was sharp as a tack. And so I knew there was something behind that question. I said, why? What'd she say? And she said she's known you since the day they adopted you. And I just said, what? She said she's known you since the day they adopted you. And so I went over.
And at this point, let me interject for 1 second, Fred. You're 41, right?
I'm 41.
You're 41 when you find this out at a party.
Yep, 3 kids, a wife, well into my family, self-sufficient, thinking I'm on equal footing with everybody else here. I'm like one of everybody else. And so when I went over and talked to Lydia, she started off, oh, your children are beautiful. And she's going off on it. And I just said, what did you say to my wife? And she looked at me and I said, did you tell her I was adopted? And she froze. You could just see she fell apart. She apologized profusely. Word traveled throughout it, the whole hall pretty quickly, as I'm, kind of freaking out. Everything became a blur. I quickly gathered my family, hightailed it out of there. And I could see them behind me, emerging from the hall, realizing that, he found out. He found out here, and it was in front of a lot of people. My best analogy to it is it felt like the emperor's new clothes. I was the only one that didn't know I was totally naked. Everybody else in the world knew it. And it was a lot to process. It was a lot to, just kind of come to terms with. And it started me in a bit of a spiral, and I struggled with it. That Monday, I actually called the state of Wisconsin, because the first thing to go in my head when that happened was trust. I lost trust in just about everything. I didn't know what to trust. I didn't know what to believe. So I called the state of Wisconsin. I thought, well, they're not going to lie to me and they can tell me who I am. I wasn't adopted before that. Yes, I was, but I didn't understand the rules of an adopted person. You don't get to know who you are. That's something that is not allowed for you to understand, And so when I asked, they confirmed I was indeed adopted. But then they ended, and I said, well, who am I? Where did I come from? Who was I born to? And they proceeded to educate me, to let me know that, as an adopted person, you don't have a right to that information. There's a process to find it out. And in Wisconsin, the process is you first receive your redacted file. You can apply for that after paying fees and waiting time, and you get your redacted file. Then you, from that point, you can write a letter to your birth mother asking her to release your identity. That's handed to the state. The state then takes it, reads it to your birth mother. If she accepts, then you're given her name and number. You can call her and connect. If she declines, you have to wait 5 years before you can apply again. If she does not accept at that point, it's terminal in the state of Wisconsin. You're not allowed to apply again. So it's a pretty heady letter. That letter carries a lot of weight. So I did follow the process. I was fortunate. My birth mother did agree to let me know who I was. And as a result of that, I did connect with her. It was interesting because in a conversation with her, and she has since passed, we had about 7 years together. And I'm going to say, when she agreed to let me know who I was, she stipulated on the front end, because in my letter, I recognized, and it was, I got some coaching from the social worker at the state. You need to be sensitive to her situation, because my desperate plea was, how do I write a letter that's going to let me know who I am? I lost my foundation that night. I needed a new foundation. The house had nothing to stand on. And so I, in the letter, acknowledged that, I'll agree to whatever level of confidentiality you need in order for me to find out. And so she did agree, but she did stipulate, nobody must ever know. I'll let you know who I am, but you cannot tell a soul. And she meant that basically from her standpoint. Obviously, I'm going to tell my wife, I'm going to tell my kids, other people that I know, but she really didn't want it out there who she was. And she did confide in me after, we started meeting, because we did meet, and, I was able to spend some time with her, get to know who she was. She disclosed who my birth father was. She did allow me to meet her children. Her daughter actually knew at the time, so it wasn't a shock to her. And that relationship has gone pretty well, and we still keep in contact. But her son did not know. And so that relationship was, I'd say, a very big struggle. And she indicated, had I come out and asked her even 3 years before, when her husband was alive, she would not have disclosed who, allowed me to find out who I was, just because she did not want her husband to find out. She bore a child prior to their marriage. To her, that was a very shameful event. As I dug into that, as I got to know her better, as I also talked to my half sister and really understood it, all I'll say is she carried a huge burden of shame. Her family was hard on her at the time. She went away. She was gone, over the holidays. I was born. Here's what gets really interesting. One of the groups I found early on was the Late Discovery Adoptee group by Ron Morgan. It was back in around 2000. It wasn't a Facebook group, it was an email chain. And as I went onto the website to find out, what these are, the image there, their mascot is actually the April Fool gesture. My birthday is April Fool's Day. It's like one of those bizarre twists in life, we talk about an irony. But she carried a huge burden of shame, and I felt terrible for her. I felt bad for her. I empathized with it, but it also, I'm going to say, really interfered in our relationship. When if we'd meet in a restaurant, I was to come in the back door and sit at a table. She would then enter through the front and find me. We couldn't enter together. We couldn't meet in the lobby. That's how our relationship was. And even at the end, when she was passing, she instructed her daughter, do not let him know that I passed away. He cannot come to the funeral. They'll figure it out, And so I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral, and that was a hard punch in the gut, but it's part of the road, part of the journey. So.
So how long did it, when you began your search, how long was it until you found your birth family?
I outline all this in the book, and it's interesting. The level of desperation I felt at the time, because I don't know how to explain it to anybody except for to say, yeah, and it was kind of interesting. From the time I found out until the time I thought I had found my birth mother, and I'm going to say I went on my own search before the state came forward, and that was about they ended up connecting us. I think it took about 8, maybe 10 weeks before, they connected us. And I barked down a path. I got really close. I actually got to the same graduating class as my birth mother. And she was not, she didn't end up being the final candidate just because I was off on a little information. She was a teacher. The state had told me that earlier. And so I assumed she went to a four-year university. At that time, they just needed a 3-year teaching certificate. So as I was doing the narrowing in her graduating class, because I did figure out her graduating class, there was a slip by the social worker. Instead of telling me where I was born, she accidentally told me the residence of mother. So I knew she was from the hometown that she was from. I put that together because the social worker, no, actually you were born in Milwaukee, not Cambridge, and it was like, oh, what's Cambridge? And then as I looked at birth certificates, I could figure out that, where birth mother's origin is pretty close to, the place that I was born. And so I put that together. So I did get very close. I went as far as contacted that family. I couldn't find, the wrong mother's family, but based on other clues, I thought I had the paternal donor, and actually contacted his daughter, and had her convinced that I was her half brother. And she was actually rather disappointed when she found out I wasn't, and it was an interesting story. Now, most of the book, and I'm going to say the following 6 years, it is spent trying to put together the pieces of the families that I could. My birth father had died prior to me finding out I was adopted, and I wanted to find out who he was. I wanted to find out what I could about him. And interestingly enough, he's from a very interesting family. Wow, that's kind of wild. I see something on my screen. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, somebody's off of mute. We'll check and see who that is.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry about that. And what year were you adopted?
I was adopted in 1959.
59. Okay. And your original birth certificate, I mean, was it factual?
The only things that were factual on it, the facts remain my birth date, my birth time, and I believe county of residence or county of birth remained consistent. I was born in Milwaukee County, April 1st, 1959. I think it's something like 5:45 a.m. or something. So that remained consistent. Everything else was modified,
Okay, it was, yeah.
And I think, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, when you did your search and you were connected to your birth mother, was that a phone call? That initial one? Did you make it? How did that?
Yeah, the initial call, after she allowed me to find out who she was, I was given her name and number, and I called her, and I'm going to say immediately. I was teaching school at the time, and so as soon as the school day was over, I called her from school and made that initial connection. And I'll say it was a very powerful phone call. It was a hard phone call. It was a rewarding phone call. I'm going to say afterwards, it brought me to tears. It moved me quite a bit. She was nice. She was kind. She, I know I can sound a little harsh because I'm still a little irked. She didn't let me come to her funeral, but it is what it is, and I understand, she, if anything, I regret so much that much shame was put on her that she couldn't ever shed it during her life. She went through an entire marriage. She bore 3 additional children. One of my half sisters died young at 20. And actually, I mean, I think I can say it at this point. She had a condition known as neurofibromatosis. I don't know, are you familiar with neurofibromatosis? It's if you've ever seen it, and you'll notice it more in people that are a bit older. A lot of skin bumps, just massive amounts of skin bumps all over. And it's a neurological condition, and it's benign tumors that form. And it's a 50-50 genetic condition. Either you get it or you don't. And you don't really know you have it until you hit puberty, and then at puberty, if you have it, it'll manifest itself. So she had a total of 4 children. I was the first child she had. Myself, and then the next child she had, which was my half sister, we did not have it. But then the 2 subsequent children did have it. So my half brother had it, and then my half sister had it. Both my half brother and my half sister, I'd say, died from complications somewhat young. My half sister at 20, long before I ever met her or found out. So obviously I never met her. And then my half brother, I did meet a couple times, and he had it, and it was pretty predominant. It was very visible on my mother too, and so that was, for myself, that was an adjustment as well. She told me on the front end she had it. It was in the social work file that she had it, so I was aware of it going into it. But to me, it's as I look at her story, I'm shocked that I feel bad for her, that she ended up going to the grave with that much shame, that she could never said that. That was.
And your book. Okay. So did you start the writing process while she was still alive, or was that something that
the first 6 years, and what I'm going to say is, I look back at that period, until I brought some resolution to it all. It affected a lot of people. It affected not only myself, obviously profoundly, but it also affected my wife. I'm not going to say it's the reason we divorced, but in a marriage, something that I'll say earth shaking, has ramifications. And if anything, it sent me into a bit of a spiral. One, I withdrew. I became consumed and obsessed with finding out what I could. I detached. I also, while I was present, I went to my job. I did my job. I did household duties. I carted kids around. I would say emotionally, I became somewhat detached. So my kids got impacted by it as well. I have great relationships with my kids. I have a pretty decent relationship with my ex-wife at this point. I started writing the book in about 2007. I wrote it roughly 2007, 2008. It was something I started to do to, I'd say, one, when I found out, in addition to becoming, I'm going to say, fairly obsessed with trying to find out who I was, trying to rebuild that foundation, trying to put something together that I could hold on to. I also started just consuming books on adoption, books on adoptees. And at the time, there really wasn't much that covered late discovery adoptees. And I'm going to say what there was tended to be a paragraph or two, and just considered it to be an awful occurrence, and that wasn't very helpful. And so part of the intent of writing the book was to bring light to it. I recognize there were other, because I participated in, the late discovery adoptee board, there were people coming in periodically, and then people would just kind of disappear for a while, and it was a sizable crowd. I'd say at any given time, there was, usually 20 or 25 people actively participating. And I could see, number one, there wasn't really much on it that covered it. And then number two, and I'll say even today, as I look at the literature available, I'd say pretty heavily dominated by females. We were talking a little bit about that before. And what I said before, I love reading their books. I think it's phenomenal. As a guy, I kind of want to read a guy's book sometimes. So part of it was just to help fill that void as well. And I won't lie, part of it was just to help me heal, just to help. It was very cathartic to write, just to put it into words, to formulate, what I was thinking. Unfortunately, shortly after that, around 2008, 2009, came to terms with the help of the law that I was an alcoholic, and I needed to address that. So spent about 3 or 4 years really kind of hammering on that. I'm 13 years sober now, comfortable in my skin in that regard. And I think that is what allowed me to then finally become emotionally ready to put the book out there. If you've read the book, I'm pretty open. I don't hold back a lot. I think I'm pretty transparent. I talk a lot about my emotions, my feelings, and I think that's what's needed, and that was helpful to me, and I hope it can be helpful to other people as well. I lost your
I was
voice.
just looking at, yeah, I put myself on mute there for a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. So who would you recommend your book for, Forbidden Roots?
You know, it's I would say just about anybody there, you know. And let me ask you, have you had a chance to read it or not quite yet?
I'm not finished with it, but yeah, I'm in it. Yes.
Okay. So, you know, I'll say the way it's written, you know, and what I've seen, what I've heard, the feedback I've gotten is it does kind of read like a mystery. You know, there's aspects to it. So I'm going to say that the storyline is interesting. And as you get into the families I discovered, you know, I go pretty deep into, you know, some of their histories. And again, those families are very, very fascinating. I've got my grandmother on my biological father's side, two of her siblings, a sister and a brother, are both in the Grand Ole Opry Hall of Fame. There's a connection to Obama that actually goes way back. I have relative, you know, biological family that fought in the Civil War on both sides. I have some that fought in the South. I have some that fought in the North. I have family that was in the Revolutionary War, in the Mexican-American War, you know. So it really opened me to a whole new world, of what was out there. And, you know, am I part of the Civil War? No. But what I'm going to say is what I've come to terms with is I look at my grandfather, or I'm sorry, my great-great-grandfather, and actually it was my great-great-great-grandfather that fought in the Civil War, one of them that I know. And I can look at anybody else that walks down the street. My relationship with that person is no different than theirs. They were dead long before they were born. Mine was dead long before I was born. So I should have the right to honor that person, to honor that life. And that's what I believe. That's a strong belief I have. And that's where I think, you know, as an adopted population, you know, we're held back from that. We're held back from, you know, many of us go on search. Many of us, you know, are reunited. It was interesting this morning. And I don't know, he may be on here. I wasn't sure if he was going to join. When I lived in Minneapolis, I was an architect, and I worked with another architect who became a very good friend of mine, Bob. Bob, you know, told me early on he was adopted, and he was in the midst of trying to find his birth mother. Now, he had a complicating situation. He's from Pennsylvania originally. He was living in Minnesota, so it was cross state lines, and, you know, he was running into roadblock after roadblock, and, you know, he'd be waiting on this next social worker call, and, you know, just couldn't get anywhere. And I could see how frustrating it was for him. You know, and even at the time, I didn't really understand it to the level I understand it today. You know, I didn't get that adoptees are just blocked from that information, you know, in many states. There are states with open records laws. I applaud them. You know, I know Australia is very far ahead in that regard. I've talked to Peter a little bit about that, and that's awesome. You know, I hope someday we can get there. I hope all the states someday can get to a point where they have open records laws, not just birth certificates, but all the vital information. You know, I still to this day, even though she granted permission, I was released from the hospital at 3 days. From what I can tell, I was placed in my adoptive home at roughly 3 months. Where was I the first 3 months? I've contacted the state, and all I get is the law does not provide for you to know that. I'm barred from knowing if I was in foster care, 1 home, 2 homes. Was I in an orphanage? I don't know. You know,
Yeah.
why is that? Why is that? I don't understand it.
A
You know, and I'll
lot
say
of
that.
adoptees have said that. That's, you know, where was I? Why can't I have that information?
Yeah. You know, and what gets interesting, and I'm going to say, I don't know how many LDAs can relate to it, but when you live a good chunk of your life believing that all that information is at your fingertips and that we're all equal on that accord, and then suddenly you find out that you're of a different class, that you are not of that same class where you're entitled to all your records. it's a juxtaposition that I really still haven't reconciled in my head. So it's become as I've reemerged into the adoption community, that's now my passion. How do we change that? And it's interesting, and I'm not going to be critical, but I'll say, there's aspects to the adoption community, adoptee community that I've seen that have changed radically, since 2000 when I first was involved. And I'm going to say the advent of social media, Facebook, and all the groups and connections, podcasts, and this type of an event, all this is bringing it out much more. It's bringing it front and center, which is awesome. So I applaud you for your work. That's amazing. Back then it wasn't. It was just kind of in the corner little email groups, trying to chat and comfort each other. So things are moving forward. But at the same time, I'm going to say I was shocked that more laws hadn't changed. In 20 years, not much really moved. What maybe 3 or 4 states, which Wisconsin was not one of them, which I was vastly disappointed at. And so I want to see how can we make that happen. As far as I know, adoptees are about 2% of the general population. That's a large number of people. The other thing I'm going to say, though, is, as I engage with adoptees, and I love adoptees. I mean, I've come to realize, that, within those sibling relationships, and I've connected with 3 half siblings. Yeah, we share genetic material. Yeah, I can see my nose on that guy. Yeah, I talk just like that other guy. But we didn't share growing up together. Our experiences growing up were very different. They grew up in a different environment, in all of their cases, they were all in intact homes with their biological mothers. I wasn't. I was in a family, a loving family, a good family. I was fortunate. I got placed into a good adoption. I hear a lot of horror stories out there, and I feel bad for those people. So I think there's a lot of ground to cover. And I think if we as a population can figure out how to come together, we should have the numbers to make change. I don't think that's insurmountable. And I think that's the task at hand. How do we go about doing that? What's the most effective path? And how can we do that as soon as possible so other people don't end up in the same boat that I ended up in?
That's correct. Yeah. And sharing a story is so important, and your voice is important, obviously. And that's what we want to continue to do. You're right. In 2000, it was totally different than it is today. And now you have all the social media, and we're stronger in numbers, and the more stories that we can get out there and share and stay together and unite. Yeah. That's how change and reforming adoption is going to take place, in my opinion.
Yeah. And, it's also interesting because, and I'm going to say I don't see it as much today. Back in 2000, what I saw, and I'm going to say the entire adoption constellation, back then it was just called the triad. Today it's called the constellation. I'm learning the new vocabulary. And what I'll say, it's kind of fascinating because, back in 2000, I felt there was a little more of a divisiveness between birth mothers and adoptees and adoptive families. I think what I'm seeing today is birth mothers and adoptees are starting to come together more and realize that they both have, I'm not going to say the same path, but a similar plight in that they've both dealt with shame in their life. They've both probably ended up in environments that weren't their first choice. And probably, in my case, I can look at it and say, I had my identity, taken away from me for 41 years. I wasn't allowed to be who I am, and I would say that's something that has come about, more so even in the last 10 years, is really starting to acknowledge and understand that, and I'm not just going to say it rests all on those 3 months, but, my original name was Stephen Walter. I'm Fred Nicora. It's Stephen Walter. I myself have a little fantasy land of my own. I know sometimes we call them ghost kingdoms, but my little fantasy land is my first name is what my birth mother gave me, Stephen Walter, and then my last name is my birth father's. So Brookshire, that's who I am. I'm Stephen Walter Brookshire. I'm doing life as Fred Nicora. I'm not going to change that. if you haven't figured out, I've got some ink on me. And yeah, my birth name's on there somewhere. You know, that was my way of bringing it and welcoming it on board and recognizing, you know, in essence, that is who I am, because that's the person in totality, not just the part that went through the adopted part of his life, not knowing, because that was a different person. You know, 20 years ago, I was a different person than I am today.
And let me ask you, I want to, if you don't mind, I want to get back to the book.
Sure.
When you said that you started writing in 2007 and went into 2008, right?
Yep.
So obviously you had some idea of how you wanted to write the book and the message that you wanted to deliver to your readers. What was the greatest thing that surprised you when you were writing a memoir? Because, you know, you lay it out and you have a vision for what you want to say and how you want to say it. But when you actually get into the writing, though, sometimes that pulls you in an unknown place, and all of a sudden you're writing something that you didn't even think you had it in you. I mean, I know I speak from personal experience, but I just want to know how you felt about that. Did you discover something? What was this great realization that you had when you got in your book that really surprised you about your writing?
Yeah, I think to me, as you go through if you get in, as you read through the book in the totality, and I did end up at, you know, and I'll say this is probably the biggest revelation, and I mentioned it before too, that I started writing it about me, and I started writing it about what was happening to me, and it was more of a chronological you know, a chronological line of things and events that occurred. What it started to do for me is I started to dive deep into some of the aspects and look at some of those family histories. That's where the revelation came that I'm connected to these people. You know, I'm connected to, you know, James William Brookshire, who fought in the Civil War. That's my great great grandfather. And in those connections, recognizing that if it wasn't for him fighting, and he happened to be on the side of the North. And as I said, I've got some that fought on the South. I've got some that fought on the North. It's a fascinating dynamics in the families. I actually have, from what I can tell, back in Missouri, because Missouri was kind of a split state in the Civil War, I had cousins fighting against each other, you know, distant relative cousins fighting against each other. But they were fighting for a purpose. They were fighting for, you know, rights of people. That, you know, you can get into the theory of the Civil War, and I'm not going to enter that big dialogue, but, you know, all men are created equal, you know. Well, guess what? All of a sudden, how would James Walter Brookshire feel, you know, his third down the line grandson doesn't have the same rights as everybody else, you know? And that, I think that cemented some of those beliefs for me. So it became you know, not only like, don't do this to people, don't hold secrets on them because it hurts them. But beyond that, the scope of, you know, we've got a fundamental structural problem that some people don't enjoy the same rights as other people do. And there's not really a valid reason for it. You know, and I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but, you know, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of money tied up in adoption, and a lot of people are interested in holding on to those bucks. And, you know, if I think about it, and it's actually, you know, I hope I don't shoot myself in the foot here, but, you know, maybe the wrong angle is the moral justification angle. Maybe the right angle is, let's just face it, if you turn to an open record state, you've now just gone from needing a lot of highly paid individuals to process these people who can't find what they're trying to find, to a bunch of file clerks, and you don't need as many of them. You know, you could reduce a state budget probably of a department by what, 50%? You know, maybe that's the angle, you know, because I don't know if the moral angle is getting us very far. It doesn't seem like it is. You know, in 20 years, I don't know how much the ball's really moved. So,
Well, I know we've got I guess, scheduled next month. That'll be the first Friday in February, and we're going to talk about legislation. We're going to talk about what worked and what didn't work in 2022 and what's going on in 2023 and how we can each take a part and support that legislation. So that's coming up next month. So
Awesome.
yeah.
I look forward to hearing about, and I'd love to engage in that discussion. So,
Okay, so I really appreciate you being with us this evening. And at this time, we're nearing the 8 o'clock hour, so we are going to go ahead and close the recording at this time. I'm going to stop the recording.